Alright guys, welcome back to the West Virginia Backwoods Podcast. I'm your host Colton Stanley, and this is the third episode. Today's going to be kind of like a turkey hunting episode. Season comes in less than a month away, April 19th. So yeah, that's really going to be our main focus today, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So let's dive right into it. Alright, so we'll start off with some turkey habitat tips. Knowing where they roost, travel routes, feeding sites, just all that stuff. So, let's start off with roost. Turkeys, they most typically, from what I've heard, go to water at least twice a day. More than often, usually the first watering is in the morning, and almost the second is always prior just to roosting. Roosts are usually not too far from a water source, a pond, creek, or that's really all we have around where I live. And yeah, another good thing for, finding, I know we kind of hit on this last episode, but another good tip for finding your roost sites is shed hunting. Just being out there walking around. Usually you can find, your roost sites pretty easy around here. We have a lot of turkeys up on the farm I usually hunt. Usually most of the roost trees are usually big sycamores right along the creek. So that's where I've found the majority of mine at. I have saw them actually we have a few big oak patches. Seems like they like to roost back in there too. But the majority of the turkeys I see usually are roosting in big sycamore trees with big overhanging branches. And yeah, they're not hard to find. One way you can tell if it's a roost tree or not is turkey poop. If it's a roost tree, there'll be a lot of turkey poop on the ground, on the floor, of where you're walking. So that's one thing to look out for. Something else I've found success in is maybe 2 weeks before season. I like to at least go up, maybe take 2 mornings just to go up and listen, see where they're roosting from. The turkeys around here, they usually roost in the same spot almost consistently every day. That's one of the big tips that I have. I also like to go up at night right before dark, and I'll just get up on a ridge. And usually, if I get up on the one ridge we have on our farm, usually I can tell where they roost easy. You can hear them flying up, and usually they gobble once or twice before dark. Another thing that I like to talk about is their travel routes. Turkeys, their travel routes really vary with the terrain you're in. In open fields or like pasture fields, it's usually a pretty narrow gap between, 2 wooded portions. Marshy ponds may, steer turkeys a little bit. Fence lines or, old roads, they offer preferred routes for them. They're not like deer. They kind of like the easy way out. Or even like shallow crossings on a creek is another good thing for like turkey crossings. If you have turkeys, turkey tracks should show up readily, and then you should be able to tell what their travel routes are. And if you're really good enough, you should be able to take that trail back and find out where they're starting on it. And that's another way to find the tree and find where they're roosting at. Another thing is, though, turkeys, they walk a lot of places, but turkeys do have the ability not to fly necessarily, but to glide from, I always like to say, ridge to ridge. So, that tip on, following their tracks may not necessarily be a thing. Usually they don't walk if you spook them. Aside from that, though, we'll look at feeding sites. Spring has, there's tons of food for turkeys. Leaves, buds, grasshoppers, insects, spiders, snails, slugs, just anything. Spring's totally different from the fall. Your mass productions and seeds tend to fall, in very specific locations. It's not like that in the spring. But during the spring, you can find blackberries, blueberries, they really like those to get into. Really, any other food source like that. Baiting is not legal for turkeys in West Virginia, thank goodness. But that's absolutely one place, or one way, you can easily find it. Now we'll hit the topic of 12 gauge or 20 gauges. Me personally, I use a 12 gauge. It's a Winchester SXP. I've used it for 3 years now. I use 3.5-inch turkey loads. 3-inch turkey loads. And they're more of like a high powdered load. Definitely with the gun I have, you can shoot probably 65 yards easy. And, kill a big tom, because it's not always that easy to get them within 25 yards. I've learned. I missed one last year at like 55. I don't really know what happened, and I'm sure I just pulled or something. Another thing is, knowing your shot size. Turkey hunting, when you're hunting turkeys, you need to find a balance of your pellet count, your power, and making sure the shot size doesn't affect your decisions of shots. I mean, probably the most popular sizes are number 4, 5, and 6. The larger would be obviously the number 4. They have a, bigger and more firepower, more knockdown power. Your smaller number 6 pellets, they're more of a higher count. You get a lot more into a load. That'd probably be more of a close range shot. And then the number 5, it has a good balance between power and then your pattern density. Tungsten, has a higher density of a shot that, can kind of help, your turkey hunters use smaller pellets, but, still retain, a lethal downrange energy. And, it increases the pellets in a pattern. Turkey loads, from what I know, most commonly contain tungsten pellets, from like a number 7 to a number 10. I kind of also want to look at, what's better, standard versus Magnum. I never really did hunt. Seems like the last 4 years, Magnum loads have really, really, really boosted in popularity, especially among turkey hunters. Adding extra pellets, per shell to increase, the likelihood of a nice clean kill. But, your standard loads, still aren't a bad option, especially, for like a gobbler chase. And if you prefer accuracy and, if you don't really want to deal with that higher recoil associated normally with your Magnum. But, I mean, if you don't mind that extra kick, Magnum loads are very, very effective. They usually need to be shot with a turkey choke to really see the benefits of using a Magnum. I don't know. There are a lot of people. I guess it's just more of what you want to shoot, but that's my opinion. If you really want to get as much as you possibly can out of your Magnum loads, you have to, and I mean have to, have a turkey choke. Something else, if you're wanting to really pick between 12 and 20, if you have both guns, I'd highly recommend, pattern testing. Find whatever combination of a choke and a load, you want that shoots best for you and the situations you're going to put yourself in. It's not good to hit the woods opening day, not shot your shotgun. Maybe you shot it 2 years ago and you're just assuming, it shoots good. By checking your pattern, you'll know exactly how your chosen combination performs, out in the hardwoods. And then you can make, necessary adjustments before, your shot, before you go out to hunt. I mean, if I'm being honest, my opinion is I'd rather 12 gauge. Just gives me a little bit more room for error. You check out a lot of these YouTube videos that show this, and if you really watch carefully and you look at the patterns, of course, these guys have probably really, really nice shotguns. You can't really tell, you can't really tell much difference on the pattern. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on that. Another thing, I've really saw become popular is a lot of the older turkey hunters I've talked to, they talk about the run and gun hunting styles, which, pretty much is, a certain hunter making a series of calls, listening for a response, and then heading down on a trail or going to the bird that is sounding off, or, to seek further of getting a bird that will play with your call back and forth, back and forth. A big thing now is blind hunting for turkey hunting. I have shot a turkey out of blind. My first turkey was not. No, I haven't shot a turkey out of a blind. I never have. I have hunted the one spot where I know these turkeys roost every year for the last 4 years. I usually do set up a blind because I really have them patterned now. They do the same thing every year, and I still can't manage to kill one of them. But, one of the really, really good blinds I've noticed is it's the Alps Outdoors Deception blind. It's more of a turkey hunting blind, real compact blind. It works great. It seems to really break up around its surroundings. It really breaks up you, and once you get in a good spot, it's very, very, very hard to tell, where exactly this is happening. Another big thing is fall turkey hunting. I've never really heard of that. I always just thought that was more of a spring. But, I think from my understanding, a lot of people that I've heard around here in the fall, they do more of a turkey hunting style where they get on a flock, purposely bust them all up, kind of make the gobblers get away from the hens, and then right away they'll try to call those gobblers back into the hens. That's what I've heard people have the most success on. around here. So, I mean, I guess your first step really in fall turkey hunting would be find the flock. And then after that, try to be the first one into that spot. I've heard a lot of people, called to bust the flock tactic before, but I've heard that it's pretty unsuccessful. Pretty much what it is, like I said, locate a group of birds, sneak in with 100 yards or less, run like a maniac into the flock. I mean, scatter them, and then just sit down and begin calling. But, probably a better option would be getting to where the turkeys want to be before they get there and waiting on them for them to arrive. Turkeys, from what I've saw, are still very vocal in the fall. Not nearly as responsive as during the spring. I'll be bow hunting, though, in a lot of places, especially in that oak patch I talked about earlier. Right before daylight, they gobble a good bit. But usually when they hit the ground, that's just about it. If you're going to call, you probably want to do just easy, simple calling. I've heard a lot of people don't have such a good experience when they start getting excited, yelping and cutting, especially during the fall. That's pretty good for the spring, but during the fall, from what I hear, that's probably not the best idea. So, I mean, and once again, another one of those big turkey loads are becoming, sorry, I know this is kind of random, is your TSS. Which TSS is a ridiculous price. I mean, I don't even know how much a TSS load is now. I bought mine a few years ago. Let me see. Let's go to Federal. So, right here, the heavyweight TSS 12 gauge, 3.5 inch is $79.99. Looking at $80 for 5 shots, which is crazy. I mean, that's a little bit too much. But there is some cheaper, options out there if you're wanting to shoot TSS. But I mean, heck, that's $16 a shot. Which is that's quite a lot. I mean, they even have one here it's more of a premium. This is for a 20 gauge. It's $82. Then you have one here. It's a heavyweight TSS, Federal Premium. And it is $95. So, the price is definitely, switch back and forth of really what you want. But it's definitely not hard. If you look hard enough, you can find a good TSS shell that is, not very expensive. But I don't really know, and I never had this mindset before, but last year, my grandpa went with me, never really did turkey hunt much. So we went up to this blind that I was talking about earlier where I knew they always roosted. Went, got set up there. They were gobbling like crazy on roost, came off roost, they were still gobbling. Ended up calling a turkey and he shot it. He used I think he told me it was close to 60 years old. And it was a number 6 shot, just 3-inch 12 gauge that his dad had from a long time ago. It still had like the little paper top on it to seal it off, keep the BBs and the powder coming out. So it's one of those things too. I don't know if it really matters even. I mean, as long as it's all about the shot. Just like these people that use the expensive arrows, expensive broadheads. If you put a good shot on it, even expensive bows, if you hit them where you want to, they're going to die. So, I mean, that's a pretty simple logic, I feel like. Another thing I really want to look at is things you should do before turkey season. Obviously you should scout. If you find any areas where there's leftover acorns or berries, that's obviously a very, very, very good spot to look. Another thing I think you should do is kind of learn your terrain you're going to be hunting. Find some good ways. Have always a plan of how to get to point A to point B quietly, but quickly, most effective way. Another big thing would probably be practicing calling. Mouth calls, even locator calls. You still have to practice with those, I know a lot of people just say, you just make noise and they'll gobble. That's not necessarily true. You can spook a turkey by making a lot of noise. You really want to check your gear too, make sure everything's in good working order. Make sure your shotgun's all cleaned up. Make sure you shot it. Make sure your calls are all good and working, and make sure your decoys are, ready to be out there in the field. Probably the best time, obviously, to find a turkey is in the early morning. But another good time to find a turkey is also right around 11 o'clock. Don't know why, that's just the success I've had. Usually they'll gobble for about an hour in the morning, shut up. If you go back there at 11 o'clock, they're gobbling again. That's one of the things I've had, one of the best tips I've had. Another thing is be patient. Turkeys are a very elusive animal. They may set out at 65 yards and you don't have a shot for 2.5 hours, and may come in. So that has to be one of the biggest things, is just sit still, sit back, and just enjoy what you're getting to see in that moment. Another thing would have to be, really using your calls effectively. Use a variety of calls, a hen call, locator calls, gobble calls, and if you utilize all those, you should be pretty good, especially if you're really good with them. Another thing would be utilizing your decoys. Decoys can be super, super effective, especially in the earlier part of the season, when turkeys are still grouped together. Obviously stay camouflaged, make sure you have your silhouette, make sure it's all broke up, make sure there's no shadows, no bright colors on. That's the biggest thing. Find a camo color that is going to be best for the time of the year you're hunting. And, maybe buy a little bit of a darker and then buy a little bit of a lighter. Darker if it's just rained, the woods are wet, leaves are wet. You can kind of blend in with the darker color. And then a lighter if it hasn't rained and it's nice and it's a nice sunny day. Obviously you need to focus on your roosting area, so you can, have the best opportunity of getting on a turkey quick. Take high ground, walk ridges, just walk ridges. You're going to find one if you have turkeys. Another thing would be always identify your target before you shoot. There has been a lot of people, killed, in turkey hunting because of the stupid mistakes other people have made by shooting without not knowing what really they're shooting at. So let's see what else we can look at. We'll just look at a few more tips. It's always better to be early than late. For me personally, I like to be sitting on the dark waiting for, I want to be up before the turkeys are up. I want to be up in the woods before the turkeys are up so I can hear the first calls of the hens or the first gobble. And, it gives the woods some time, to settle down after you just walked into a roosting area or up on a ridge. So I like to try to be there usually at least 30 minutes before you, obviously get to your spot. It's good to carry more calls than you really need. I try to have, several diaphragm calls, usually 2 slates and then about 2 box calls. Usually turkeys will like one call more than the other. So, it's all just really known about you. If you hunt certain turkeys every year, you obviously know which ones will work better, but it all depends on the day also. Another thing is, I was thinking about what I said, a few minutes ago. Locator calls don't necessarily have to be perfect. An owl hooter's one, a coyote howler, and those are probably your 2 for the morning at most, and then your crow call. But I do want to say, don't blow a coyote howler at roosted birds. That's not a good idea. If you blow a coyote howl, they may be a little bit more weary to come into the spot you really want them to. They probably won't come into your call as much. If you know where they roost, pinpoint where they roost. Try to get within 100 yards of that roosting area if it's possible. Once they're on the ground, and you don't have success getting them in, go to ridges, start walking ridges, listen for that gobble. And another thing is play hard to get. Don't call too much, but just fire them up and then shut up. Just let them come to you. You don't necessarily have to call turkey ins. If they hear their call, they know where you are. You don't have to start calling all the time. I already kind of hit on, being patient and, use the logging roads to your advantage. Just walk logging roads. It's quiet, and then just, maybe stop every half a mile and, blow your crow call. See if you can get one to gobble. Obviously, when they're on the roost, you want to get as close as you possibly can. Me personally, I will try at least to get 100 yards or closer, if the vegetation, will allow me to. If you do that, your success rate will definitely go up. And another thing is your decoy positioning. You want to put it on the opposite side of where you think the gobbler will come from. If you position your decoy on the wrong side of where you want the birds to end up, they may walk right past your decoy because it doesn't sound really that's where it's coming from. But, obviously when a gobbler gets close, be ready. If you hear that first gobble, get your shotgun up and be ready. Turkeys can pick off the smallest movements, and I really alliterate on that. It is crazy some of the stuff they pick up on. They're very, 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 very particular. They have very, very good eyesight. They pick up movement very well. a lot better than even deer do. So that's definitely something you need to learn. So pretty much, the West Virginia season, kicks off the 19th through the 20th for your youth season. And then the statewide regular season opens up from April 21st through May the 25th. One of the big regulations to know in West Virginia is electric calls are not allowed, baiting are not allowed, and hunting with dogs are not allowed. Only bearded turkeys can be harvested. Legal hunting hours in West Virginia are from 30 minutes before sunrise until 1 p.m. You're not allowed to use air rifles. Air rifles smaller than a .22 caliber. Hunters, you can only take one bearded turkey per day. Season limit is 2. And during the youth season, hunters under 18 can harvest one bearded turkey per day, counting toward their overall season limit. You're only allowed to use shotguns, bows, or crossbows. Those are the only things permitted for your youth hunters. So thanks guys for tuning in to today's episode. I know it's a little bit late. It's about 2 weeks since I posted the last podcast. Just haven't had time to get one in. So I appreciate you tuning in. You can check us out on Spotify at West Virginia Backwoods Podcast. Or if you're listening on YouTube, thanks. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because there's always a podcast coming. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.